Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting, and we're going to continue our lesson on cellular respiration and photosynthesis. Today we're really going to compare and contrast them and see how they're similar and how they're different from one another. So let's go ahead and hop into it and see what we're learning about today. So first of all, let's just talk about energy as a whole before we talk about how it's really made. Okay, so remember that energy flows in a linear line. Okay, and what I mean by that is it has a definite starting point and a definite ending point. On Earth, all energy ultimately comes from the sun. If you go back far enough, when we're talking about food and stuff you're eating, all energy starts with the sun, okay? So the sun, it's like 93 million miles away from the Earth, is producing so much energy. Some of that energy gets to the Earth, okay? When it strikes the Earth, certain organisms can harness that energy. And we call those organisms producers or autotrophs, okay? These are plants, algae, cyanobacteria. Any organism that can capture that sunlight is called an autotroph or a producer, okay? So those organisms take that sunlight, make glucose out of it, but then something's going to eat those types of organisms. So this could be like a grasshopper, any type of insect, any type of herbivore. We would call those primary consumers. Okay, so primary consumers eat producers. This is like a cow eating grass. Okay, then there's going to be a secondary consumer. Okay, a secondary consumer, we would call these carnivores, like meat eaters. Okay, maybe a wolf eats the cow that eats the grass, right? And then you can kind of just keep that going. So you can have a secondary consumer, tertiary, quaternary consumer. It kind of keeps going, okay? It's going to end with a decomposer. So a decomposer is like any type of fungus, things that break down dead material and puts it back into the earth. Okay, and the matter gets recycled, but the energy doesn't really get recycled the same way. Okay, so energy flows into the ecosystem from the sun and travels in a straight line through the food chain. And that series of producers and consumers, that's the food chain that we were just talking about. Okay, so energy. This all comes from a guy called Isaac Newton. He had these laws of thermodynamics. So most of the energy is actually lost as heat along the way. So about 90% every time we went from the sun to consumers and then, or producers and then producers to consumers, every time we hit one of those different steps, we lose about 90% of the energy along the way. A lot of that energy is lost as heat. Okay, and this really comes back to Isaac Newton's second law of thermodynamics. It says in any transfer of energy, there's always a loss of useful energy to the system, usually in the form of heat. And he was right. You only get about 10% of that energy going from one part of the food chain to the next. Okay, so food chains, again, on planet Earth, all food chains really start with producers. Okay, food chains can illustrate the linear nature of energy flow. Producers form the base of the food chain and include photosynthetic organisms such as plants, algae, and certain bacteria. And remember that certain types of bacteria is called cyanobacteria. Okay, so these producers, these autotrophs, they form the basis of all food chains, and then all the energy kind of moves through them. Okay, so then we get to our primary consumer. A primary consumer would be like a plant eater. And in a science class, we call those plant eaters herbivores, right? That first word herb or herb is kind of talking about plants. So these are things that eat plants. Examples of this would be like the cow or the zebra. They're mostly just eating plants, okay? And then we're going to get into our primary consumer and our secondary consumer. Okay, these are things that eat other organisms. So for example, a secondary consumer, those are the things that eat primary consumers, okay? So things like this would be wolves and lions. They eat other animals, and so those are consumers, and because they're eating a different animal, they would be a secondary consumer, okay? And then we continue through that food chain until we get to the decomposers. Decomposers obtain energy by breaking down the remaining organic material from other members of the food chain. Examples include fungi and bacteria. So eventually, when something dies, its body gets decomposed and kind of recycled back into the earth, and that's all due to decomposers. So that's kind of how energy flows through a food chain. Okay, it starts with plants, which are producers, and then consumers, and then eventually we'll end with a decomposer. Okay, So matter kind of gets recycled, okay, in the environment, okay? All important elements move in cycles. So it goes from the environment to organisms, back to the environment, and kind of back and back again, and it kind of cycles around. So cycles that do this are like the water cycle, the carbon cycle, and the nitrogen cycle. They all get recycled into organisms and then back into the environment, okay? So let's get into some detail on that and talk about the carbon cycle and see what's going on here, okay? So remember that carbon from the atmosphere enters the biosphere through plants, okay? So the carbon starts in the atmosphere. How do we get it into organisms? Well, we use photosynthesis. Plants are going to absorb that carbon dioxide into their bodies, okay? The carbon dioxide is used in photosynthesis. The carbon then moves through the food chain, okay? So when that cow eats the grass, it's consuming that carbon, so it moves through the food chain. It's then released back into the environment by respiration, where CO2 is emitted. So imagine you have a cow that ate some grass, okay? The carbon dioxide started in the atmosphere, okay? It then moved into a plant. A cow ate that plant, so now the carbon dioxide is in that animal, and then when that animal exhales, right, it's going to eventually exhale its breath. Well, now the carbon dioxide gets put back into the atmosphere again. And so it's kind of a cycle. It goes from environment to organism to environment, kind of keeps cycling through like that. The amount of carbon dioxide fixed during photosynthesis is equal to the amount released through respiration. Okay, so carbon is very important in these different cycles and these different processes that we've been talking about. It's used in photosynthesis, and it's also made or produced in cellular respiration. Okay, here's kind of a breakdown of the carbon cycle. So carbon moves from the atmosphere to plants, then to animals, and eventually returns to the atmosphere. And you can kind of see how it looks like a circle, right? So this is a cycle. Okay. Let's talk about that in terms of photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Okay, photosynthesis and cellular respiration are complementary reactions. And in this picture here, I have, you can make a closed system. So imagine you have like a sealed bottle, okay, and in that bottle you have some animals and you have some plants. Now that closed system inside of that jar or that glass container, those organisms could live like that for a little bit because the plant is going to produce the oxygen that the animal needs, and the animal is going to produce the carbon dioxide that the plant needs. So these are mutually beneficial. The photosynthesis helps animals and cellular respiration helps plants. It kind of is a give and take, okay? Here's kind of a breakdown of what's going on, and I just kind of wanted to talk about this in a little bit of detail. So on the left over here, we're talking about photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, what we're doing is we're using carbon dioxide and water, and we're trying to make oxygen and sugar. Okay, the main thing that the plants really want is sugar. Okay, so the plants or algae or bacteria, it's bringing in a couple things. What is it bringing in? It's bringing in sunlight, it's bringing in water, okay, it's bringing in carbon dioxide. Through photosynthesis, we are releasing oxygen and we are releasing sugars. Okay, these are the three things that go into photosynthesis. These are the two things that come out of photosynthesis. Then notice how similar these are, almost in the opposite direction. The plants made the sugars. Most living organisms are going to take that sugar in. It's going to do cellular respiration, and cellular respiration, we're going to use sugar and oxygen to produce water and carbon dioxide. So the sugar gets used, okay? When we use it, we're going to release some of that carbon dioxide, okay? And then most living organisms, so all animals, for example, are going to bring in oxygen to break down the sugars, and that's going to release that water. So notice how, what do we release in photosynthesis? We release oxygen and sugars. Well, that's the same thing that in cellular respiration, that's what we're taking in. We're taking in the oxygen that we made here, and we're taking in the sugar that we made here, right? So the products and reactants are reversed. So just look at it like this, CO2 and water. That's what goes into photosynthesis. CO2 and water. That's what comes out of cellular respiration. what comes out of, what are the products of photosynthesis? Sugar and oxygen. What are the reactants of respiration? Sugars and water. So all of this to say, photosynthesis, cellular respiration, very similar chemical equations. They're just going in opposite directions, right? Okay, so let's talk about this in a little bit more detail. Respiration, energy, and the carbon cycle. How do all three of these things kind of come together, right? Well, virtually all organisms require the energy from food to do a couple things. We have to synthesize chemicals. Examples of these would be like proteins and carbohydrates. We need energy for movement. We need energy for cell division. We need energy for heat, electricity, and light production. And we also need energy for living organisms obtain this energy through cellular respiration. So all organisms, even plants and cyanobacteria and algae, those kind of organisms do photosynthesis, but they also have to do cellular respiration to get the energy out of the food, okay? And we're using all of this energy for a lot of different things. We're using it to move around, to make new cells, to repair our bodies, okay? Let's talk about respiration in a little bit of detail, okay? So respiration, this is the process of making the energy in food available to the cells, and it involves breaking it down, okay? So you can take a complicated molecule like sugar. Look at the equation for sugar, C6H12O6. There's a lot of molecules there, right? Well, we can break that down into more simple molecules, such as carbon dioxide and water. And so this is kind of a visual description of what's going on. This is sugar. Sugars are often depicted as a ring. In cellular respiration, we're going to take this big molecule and break it into some smaller molecules. What are we going to make? Well, we're going to make CO2. This is CO2. You can see 1 carbon, 2 oxygens, just like the equation makes you think. And then we can also make water. And this is H2O. So through cellular respiration, we can take glucose, which is a big, complicated molecule, and turn it into simple ones like carbon dioxide and water. Okay? And then respiration, where is this happening? Well, it happens in the mitochondria, don't forget that, okay? The energy held by complicated molecules is held temporarily as ATP, okay? And the respiration occurs mainly in the mitochondria and the cytoplasm. So just as a review of that, glycolysis is the first part of cellular respiration. It happens in the cytoplasm. The other two more complicated steps, the Krebs cycle and the ETC, the electric transport chain, those both happen in the mitochondria. If it needs oxygen, it's happening in the mitochondria. If it doesn't need oxygen, it happens in the cytoplasm, okay? And here's just a brief, I wanted to review some of this stuff with you all. So here's a review of the 3 steps of cellular respiration. There's 3 main steps. The first one is glycolysis. This happens in the cytoplasm. It can happen with or without oxygen. We take glucose and we split it and break it down the middle, okay? And we make these 2 new molecules called pyruvate out of that, okay? Then, so this happens in the cytoplasm. We're going to move into the mitochondria. If we have oxygen, we're going to do aerobic respiration, and these 2 things will happen. We'll do the Krebs cycle, which is in the mitochondria, and we'll do the ETC, or the electron transport chain, and that happens in the mitochondria as well, okay? 3 stages, kind of a little bit more information there. Glycolysis, like I said, it splits glucose, it generates 2 ATP. The Krebs cycle, we're going to harvest the energy from glucose. It's going to produce 2 ATP and happens in the mitochondria. And then the electric transport chain takes place in the mitochondria, generating 32 ATP. So most of the ATP is made in the last step, the electric transport chain. A total ATP per glucose molecule is 36. This process is only about 39% efficient. Most of it's being lost as heat, but this is much more efficient than the anaerobic respiration, okay? So let's kind of break these down a little bit. On one side, on the left over here, I'm going to have information about photosynthesis, and then on the right over here, I'm going to have information about cellular respiration. And I kind of wanted to compare and contrast them as we go. Okay, so first of all, here are the reactions, the chemical reactions. You can see that they're the same thing, just in opposite directions, right? And then let's go to the next one. Let's break these chemical formulas down into words that might be a little bit more easier to use. Okay, so the reactants for photosynthesis, we put in carbon dioxide, water, and energy from the sun. Okay, and for cellular respiration, we're putting in glucose and oxygen. Okay, what are we making out of these processes? Well, photosynthesis, we're making glucose, and in cellular respiration, we're making energy, and remember that energy is in the form of ATP. Okay, what are the byproducts of these? Well, photosynthesis, the byproduct is oxygen, which again, the plants aren't really trying to make, but it is very good for us that they do. And then cellular respiration, we're making carbon dioxide, and we're also going to make water. And so we use the oxygen that the plants make, and the plants use the carbon dioxide that we make. So it's mutually beneficial for both of us. Okay? The cellular location, so photosynthesis happens in the chloroplast. Cellular respiration mostly happens in the mitochondria, but glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm. Okay, so 2 for that one. Okay, what are the energetics, or what do we need to put energy into this or not? Okay, so photosynthesis requires energy. Where does that energy come from? It comes from the sun, right? Cellular respiration, it releases energy. So we take that glucose and we're trying to break it down to ATP so that we can actually use it as energy. So this one takes energy, this one releases energy. Okay, what are the chemical paths that we're taking here? What are the different phases or steps? Well, photosynthesis has 2 steps. It has the light reactions and it has the Calvin cycle. And another name for that Calvin cycle is the dark reactions and the light independent reactions. For cellular respiration, we always start with glycolysis. That's our first step, whether we have oxygen or not. And then if we do have oxygen, we will do the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, the ETC. Okay? A summary for photosynthesis is that sugar is synthesized, okay? And for cellular respiration, a summary is that sugars are broken down, okay? And so a summary of photosynthesis is sugars are synthesized using energy released from energy from the sun. Okay, so great work on that. Let's take a look at this. What is the general formula for photosynthesis? So again, what do plants take in? They take in carbon dioxide and they take in water. Okay, and they're going to use those 2 things as well as sunlight, and they're going to make something. What do they make through photosynthesis? Well, we make glucose and we make oxygen, okay? And so written as a chemical equation, this is how you would write it, okay? So the CO2 is carbon dioxide. We need 6 carbon dioxide molecules, okay? Water, to write it as a chemical, in a chemical way, it's H2O, and we need 6 of them, okay? And then the sunlight is mostly being used as energy. What is it releasing? Well, it's releasing that glucose, and remember the chemical equation or the chemical formula for glucose is C6H12O6, and we're also going to release some oxygen, which we write here as 6O2, okay? Great job. And then what are the 2 reactions that make up photosynthesis? Well, it's the light dependent and the light independent reactions. And remember, this one has a couple different names. Sometimes you'll see it called the dark reactions or the Calvin cycle. Okay, but they're all talking about the second step of photosynthesis. Y'all, this stuff is confusing. Thank you so much for following along with me. I got a couple of review questions we're going to do. So, teacher, if you could, why don't you go ahead and pass that sheet out to everybody, and then when you're ready for a review, come back to me, unpause the video, and we'll kind of see what everyone came up with. So go ahead, pass those out for me, and when you're ready, y'all take maybe 5 or 10 minutes, but when you're ready, come back to me, and I'll go over it with y'all. All right, I know these questions didn't give y'all any trouble, but just in case anybody's a little confused, let's see what we came up with and I'll review them with y'all real quick. So y'all feel free to add or change anything you don't have, and let's see what everybody came up with. So we'll go ahead and get started with number 1. Number 1 says organic molecules that store energy within their chemical bonds are known as what? So what type of macromolecule are we mostly getting our energy from? Does anyone remember from a couple units ago? These are called carbohydrates. Okay, so for number 1, this one could be a couple of different answers, honestly, but using the word bank and using process of elimination, That's going to be the best answer, I think. All right, number 2, organisms that rely on consuming others for food are called what? So what do we call it when you have to eat something in order to get energy? Well, there's 2 names for this. You might see consumer or heterotroph. For this class, I think heterotroph is what we want to use. So for number 2, let's go with heterotroph. Great. All right, number 3, organisms that synthesize their own food. Again, you might see a couple different names for this. You could put producer, but I think what's a little bit better for this class is autotroph. So we're going to go with autotroph for this one. Okay, organisms that can make their own food are called autotrophs. All right, next one, number 4, the process by which energy from sunlight is stored in the chemical bonds of glucose. What is that called? Well, what process that we've been talking about uses sunlight to make glucose? Okay, what is that called? Well, that's called photosynthesis, right? All right, photosynthesis. Let's keep it going. Y'all are doing great. So number 5 says the molecule that carries energy for cells to use is known as what? Well, we make glucose from photosynthesis, but what cells really like is ATP. So once that glucose is made, we got to break it down, turn it into ATP so that the cells can use it. So ATP is the molecule that carries energy. All right, let's go to number 6. Number 6 says a molecule that stores chemical energy in a concentrated and stable form is called what? Well, this is what we're making from photosynthesis, and this is glucose. Okay, glucose for that one. Well done. Let's keep it going. Number 7, the capacity to perform work is defined as what? Okay, well, energy is the ability to do work. So let's go with energy for number 7. Okay, let's keep it going. 8, a diagram that illustrates the flow of energy and matter from producers to consumers is known as a what? This is known as a food chain. A food chain is how you can show how energy moves through the environment. All right, make sure you got these first couple ones. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. All right, here's 9 and 10. So 9 says, the process by which glucose is broken down to produce ATP is called what? Well, this whole process is called cellular respiration. Cellular respiration. Okay, and then the last one here before we move on to the bottom, 10, this says the place where photosynthesis occurs is the what? Well, photosynthesis happens in the chloroplast. Okay. Okay, great. So those were 1 through 10. They're all fill in the blank, but I have 5 true or false questions down here at the bottom for y'all. So let's see what y'all came up with these, okay? Just like with true and false, we'll either use a T or an F, depending on if we think it's true or not. So number 11 says, the oxygen present in Earth's atmosphere is produced by photosynthesis. That is true. The oxygen you're breathing was made by plants or algae or cyanobacteria through photosynthesis. So the next one, number 12, in photosynthesis, the Calvin cycle occurs after the light reactions. Well, remember there's 2 parts of photosynthesis. The light-dependent reactions happen first, and then the Calvin cycle happens next. So number 12 is also true. Okay, let's keep it going. 13 says, water molecules are split during the light-dependent reactions. That one is true as well. Remember that water molecule gets split. We have 2 hydrogens, a hydrogen and 2 oxygens, and that happens in the light-dependent reactions. So that one's true. All right, 14, electron transport takes place within the thylakoid membranes. All right, the electric transport chain takes place within the thylakoid membranes. Should we put a T or an F for that one? Okay, I have this one as being true. So let's go with true for that one. Great work. All right, the next one, 15, glucose is synthesized during the Calvin cycle using ATP and NADPH. That one is also true. So a lot of true down here. They're all true. All 5 of them are true. So great work. Y'all, this stuff is complicated. Your teacher has some other stuff for you to practice on. So go ahead, make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.